I'm just back from my local woodworking store. Got a new dovetailing bit. Figure I'm gonna need that because we've got some dovetails to make, all through dovetails. We're getting ready to install dust frames. We'd milled up those a while back and kind of put them aside, but now it's time to get them in that case. I'll see you inside and we'll get started on just that. I'm Roby Price, and welcome to my garage workshop. In this series, we're building a Spalted Pecan dresser. Assembling and installing the dust frames. Glued up, everything's tight, everything's seated well, and it's square. That's probably the most important thing. But now we've got to start looking at the dust frames or drawer runners, and we are going to use a through dovetail to do this. Typically you have a dovetail, this is the side here, you'll have a dovetail that'll do about that far on one side, that far on the back, and you may have a dado that runs through. For the drawer runner that isn't really glued in, it's kind of a little sitting there because you don't want cross-grain situations. We're going to use a through dovetail, and that drawer runner is going to be dovetailed in place. It's not going to be glued, but it will dovetail it in place. And it seems like it's a lot of trouble. It also seems like it's difficult, but it really isn't. It's really quite simple. You just got to get yourself set up to do it. The benefits of this are enormous. What it will do is it will take this piece of wood up here that's already flat, and it'll stay that way because that dovetail will actually give you what in essence is a T-section or a web, and that's a structural component. It'll keep it flat. It'll keep it flat forever. This thing will always stay sturdy, and it'll be much stronger as a result. We're not going to glue that dovetail in place, as I said before. We'll probably put a little wax on it so that this piece can move, but the dovetail won't move this way. It's a cross-grain situation, so the drawer runner will not move nearly as much as this panel will, and if you were to glue it in, you might end up splitting this panel in the long run. I've seen it happen before. It's a sad thing. So the first thing we need to do is start to hog out some material, and to do that, I have a router here set up with a 1/4-inch bit, and it's a 1/4-inch depth. That's what we're going to use. We're going to create that dado in there, and that's going to remove a lot of material. We're going to follow up with a dovetailing bit, and what this does is it takes a lot of load off of the dovetailing bit, and you'll get a cleaner cut. It won't fight you nearly as much if you've done that prep work, so that's real important. Now these routers are exactly the same. You could, but it doesn't have to be. If you've got two different types of routers, you can use those, but you've got to be extremely careful with the spacer you use. This is the example that I'm pointing to right here, and this spacer is sitting up solid against this panel right here. If you take the router and you push it up against your spacer and move forward, you'll have a clean line going all the way across, and that's what we want. Not only that, you follow up with the second router and you take it and they're centered. Follow up again, you flip the whole piece over and use it up here, and the dust frames are equidistant from the bottom. So that's the system we're going to use. But we're not going to use a board like this. What we're going to use is this piece of MDF. We're going to cut it to length for the top drawer indexed from the bottom. And after we do that, those two dust frames, top and bottom, left and right, I'll get it straight, then we'll cut off just about the right amount, exactly the right amount of material to attack the second dust frame. And we will continue with that process until we run out of dust frames. So the first step, we got to go to the table saw, which you can't see is right over here. We've got to take our MDF and we've got to get it cut to the right size immediately. Well, I have cut to width and now it's time to cut to length. And crosscut sled is an excellent way to do that. But we got 3/4 of an inch right here, and I've got only 18 across here to support. This thing's going to tip, and I don't want to be pushing down on this trying to level it out and keep it level as I go through the blade. We could put a board on the end over there, and that would probably do the job, but I've got a better solution. My jointer is just over here, and we're going to set up over there so you can see what's going on. I have a jig with adjustable feet that I will clamp to the fence of the jointer, and this will level it out even with the top of my saw, and that'll give me support really far out there, and this slip surface makes it slide through real easy. Give me a minute, we'll set up over there so you can see what's going on. I've got my jig set up over here, and it doesn't set up real well without this, and it was originally set up to be pretty much even with this tabletop like that, but I've got that right there, which is a little bit more. So what I have to do, these two things are even with that, so I can take these, put them under the legs when I use my crosscut sled. That way I don't have to adjust it. Take a clamp, find a web, and give him a little bit of tight, like that. And then I'm in business. My guide fence has been cut to length, and now I'm making the first of two cuts. This one is the cut for the dado. Note the blue tape on the router base. This tells me which side of the router should be pressed against the fence. We'll follow up with the dado bit. We have tape on the second router too. Routers are not perfect. The distance between the base edge and the router bit is not always centered. If we keep the same side pressed against the fence, we're ensured a parallel cut. There's a rabbet that goes into the back. That's the back panel. It also provides a lot of stiffness, keeps the piece square. Although with these through dovetails, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think it's purely going to be aesthetics. But the rabbet has to be there none the same. So what I have here is I have a router, and I have a rabbeting bit in it set up to about 3/8 inch depth, and it's got a a bearing here that will allow it to run along the side. Now I don't have a whole lot of motion here, but what I've done is I put this stop here, and what I will do, I will take this, hold it flush against the corner here where I've got one edge right here, one right here, but not engaged on this panel. I'll hold him flush, pull him in, rabbet it in till the bearing engages, and then we'll move down this way. Now yes, I realize my hand is down here, but it is protected very much protected by the jig itself. So the chips are going to go off that way, and I'm going to go this way, and we will just make the trip around the case, putting in our rabbet. Well, that was the plan, but as you can see, chips and dust are everywhere. Probably should have been wearing a dust mask in this situation. An alternative is to put these dados in on the table saw, and you would have had to have done that prior to assembly. Just didn't think about it, and when you do things out of order, this is one of the penalties you pay. I also wanted to show you that it is a little difficult, even with this jig, to get into the corner. Navigating this was a little bit of a trick. I had done it on the other 3 corners and finally was here and thought I would show you how it works. We'll clean the rest of this up with a chisel. It's time to start the dust frames. And to do that, we first need to dimension our lumber. And I've done that a day or so ago. And you've probably seen it around the shop. Everything is done on this except cutting to length. And we couldn't cut it to length until our cabinet was assembled, and it is. So now it's time to start. The first thing we're going to do are the side runners. Now these side runners, this is where the drawer comes back this way. There's going to be 3 per dust frame, 1 on each side and 1 in the middle. Now the drawers will actually run on these, and the center partition is going to have a guide that keeps the drawer centered. It's a little bit of belt and suspenders because the side of the case should keep the drawer centered as well, but we'll go ahead and put that in there. I've had good luck with the center runner, and it just seems to keep things working very nicely. So we know that these are going to be 12 3/4 inches. So what I've done here is I've set up a 0 cut on my compound miter saw, and I will cut one edge square, flip the board around, and then bring it to the mark and cut it. Now I'm going to cut everything to square first, and then I'm going to put a positive stop here on my mark so that they're all the same. We'll do that, and then we'll take them over to the workbench, and we're going to put a domino in the end of each one. One side will glue in to the front rail that comes across. The other side will float so that you can account for the expansion and contraction of the case. So let's get started. I have gotten out my horizontal mortising machine, and I'm beginning to set it up to do the mortises for the stiles on the dust frames. The stiles would be the little ones that go back and forth. The rails are the long ones that will separate out the drawers. And we can do the stiles in mass. So I have a blank on either side, and I have the stile set up here in the middle. And as you can see right there, with a small stop right here. And when I take my clamp and put pressure down, it is secure. It will not move. The next step is turn the router on, of course, and the dust collection, and then I'll use this rod to move it back and forth and create the mortise. You'll see that here in just a moment. I will point out this is one of these homemade machines, so it's not going to be like a multi-router. It needs tuning up, and I've been spending about a day doing that, and I think I'm there. So let's go ahead and make mortises and make them in mass, because I can do all of these for the stiles with this setup, and I will do so. But at the end of the day, we have to pay careful attention to which side is up. No matter how accurate you are, one side's going to be taller than the other. You're never in the middle unless you flip it over and do it twice, and then you're going to have play in your mortise, and you don't want that either. So we will mark these boards as top, and when we do our rails, we'll mark those as top as well. But first, let's go ahead and get started. Pretty good. That looks really good. Well, I just finished up a dry fit and we're getting ready to glue the bottom dust frame in place. The following things are going to happen in the order if everything goes well. I'm going to take the front rail and I'm going to glue in these floating tenons into the 3 mortises. And then I'm going to take that, I'm going to glue the stiles, all 3 stiles, onto that rail and put a bead of glue on the bottom and push them into place. After that, I'm going to glue these floating tenons into the back rail, and then I will put a bead of glue here and push this into place. There's going to be a gap on these stiles and this rail. That will allow for the expansion. We will not glue these to the case, and we will glue this to the case, and that gap will allow a little bit of movement. You're going to see me moving around taking care of these things. They may happen a little in or out of order. Don't know. We got to react with what we've got. After that, we're going to start to attack these next 3 dust frames. These are the ones with the dovetails. And then finally, we're going to get to the top dust frame, which has the split drawer divide, and that's going to be more complicated still. This is the simplest, so let's tackle it now.
We'll speed this one up at 2 times for you. It's all over but the clamping.
3. Well, as you can see, I've just finished up at the router table, and I put the dovetails in my stiles here, my dust frame supports, and I'm going to put them in coming from the back through here, and it's going to be a tight fit. There's going to be some persuasion. Now I'm going to tap these up to the length of my stiles, and I'll put a little mark right there. I want to be just shy of that in each case. When we put the stiles in, we will put the floating tenon in first, slather it up with glue, and then we'll put the tenon in behind it. There'll be some persuasion there as well. After we get the tenon pushed in flush with this, we'll take a clamp and pull him tight. But these are a series of steps. It's going to take a little while on each one of them. But first, we'll get these put in place, and I'm going to do that now. At least I think I am. As I said, it is a tight fit, and it will require some persuasion. Well, it's time to glue up the first of the dust frames. I have a set of clamps, F clamps right here, and I have my rail here. My stiles are set up there just such that they'll be a little bit proud when I put this in place. Now what I'm going to do after I get everything glued up, I'm going to take these, I'm going to put them right there, and I'm going to squeeze them in. And hopefully that will work out the way I want it to, so that I don't have to tap them in. If I have to tap them in, things bump into each other and then they separate. I'm trying to keep that from happening. So we're going to take our hide glue, which has a little more open time than others, and glue up the dovetails, glue up the mortises, glue up that floating tenon, and get our first frame in place. And after we get it in place, we will clamp it across the face to make sure we get a good tight fit. I'm set up here on the end of my workbench getting ready to make the cuts on the final 2 dust bins. I've got the bottom and 3 installed here. The 4th one that goes there is going to be the lower part of the divided drawer, and that's what makes this one a little unique. I have to put a groove in here, a dovetail groove, to receive the divider, and that's what we're set up here to do. I have the bottom and the top of these 2 last dust frames, the rails right in front here. I've got a piece of sacrificial wood in the front and in the back, and that's to keep me from having any chip out. Finally, I have a fence right here that's set up the correct distance from this side to the edge of the bit. And watch out for this, because depending upon your router, you may have a different distance on one side versus the other. I'm very cognizant of that because I've been burned before. So that's how this will set up. This side of the router will go against this fence. I've got a 1/4 inch spiral bit in my machine right now, and I'm going to take out a groove out of this. This is going to relieve a lot of the pressure on the dovetail bit. We'll follow up with that bit later and then plow through and finish the cut. After that, we will go ahead and install the top and the bottom, and we will install the side rails. We will leave the middle rail for a little later. And on the back, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. Well, we've got our final bits and pieces in place, and I'm getting ready to do the final glue up of the center divide and the back of the dust frames on top. I'm going to move the camera over that direction a little bit to give myself a little bit more room, and we'll get right after it. Well, here we are, and we have all the dust frames in place. I've got some clamps up, some final glue is drying, and I've got my center divide in place, and it's doing nicely. So I'm pretty happy with where we are. Glue ups never go as expected. There's always a challenge to be met somewhere in between, especially when you're trying to get 3 or 4 pieces to fit together all at one time. And this glue up was no different. But we have achieved our result, and part of that is selecting the glue. We're using hide glue. I think you've probably noticed that it's a bit different. It's not your typical yellow or white glue. Hide glue gives you a good long open time. It's sticky as all get out, but it'll give you the time you need to correct problems when they happen. And when trying to get dovetails and mortises and tenons to all line up, you need that time. So this step is done. We're going to take our carcass here and move him over to a set of sawhorses, and then we're going to get ready to do our next step, which is milling up drawer stock. So come back and join us, because it's going to be a busy time in the garage.